Welcome everybody to episode 10 of the Constant Geekery podcast, and I'm quite excited to say that we are back in the office.
We are indeed back, so there is no longer any delay.
So Pete, it is good to be back in the office, and specifically we're sat in your office.
We are, which is now the Constant Geekery podcast studio more than my office, to be fair.
It's part of my plan for global world domination.
Starting with a very small office. Well done.
That's okay. Yeah. And no whiskey to drink today because it is Monday morning and I got to drive home. So that is the end of the whiskey-fueled podcast.
And to be fair, your driving's pretty horrific anyway, so you don't need to have to. Although maybe it will correct itself. If you did have a whiskey, maybe you'd be really good.
We're not advocating drinking and driving on the Constant Geekery podcast, Pete.
No, absolutely not. But I'm just saying it might make your driving better.
It might. I'm afraid I've lost it there. I think I'm actually quite a good driver, Pete. So
you are. I'm just casting aspersions. You're an excellent driver.
We like to go karting and race, but it's a pretty even affair.
Yeah.
I've beaten you once. I think you've beaten me once.
Yeah, I think a lot of the time, when it comes down to skill, we're probably about the same. So it just depends who's had the heaviest dinner.
You were on a lettuce mission, I think, last time we went racing.
I hadn't eaten in weeks, and I've been breathing nothing but helium.
We've had this crazy idea of building a computer to do some e-racing, haven't we?
We have.
Obviously, that was before the global pandemic happened, and we needed to be careful with the pennies. But at some point, we will maybe do that, and we'll bring that content to the channel, complete with some karting racing action. Because the company that we own, we sponsor some karts at a local karting place.
We do. A fantastic place.
Mm-hmm. So we've totally digressed from the real point of our podcast today, which we've got two subjects that I'd like to talk about. And the first is, should a professional be buying an M1 Mac, that is? And finally, I want to talk about price scalping.
Okay.
I think this is a big issue affecting the tech community, and I have an opinion. I
do
imagine
you?
you do.
Do you have an opinion? I always have an opinion. Everyone has opinions.
Opinions are a lot like nipples, Pete. We've all got some.
We have.
You don't necessarily want to see someone else's.
No.
On that note, should a professional be buying an M1 Mac? Now, the reason why we're bringing this up, because we are indeed professionals and we have bought some M1 Macs. But I think it's fair to say we haven't bought them for our professional job. We've bought them to experiment with for YouTube.
Yeah.
And also as a sideline to see their suitability for our business, which is a web development studio digital marketing agency.
That's right.
So we'll come back to that in a moment. I released a video a few days ago where I said that maybe we need a reality check because there's a lot of hype going on about these particular machines.
There is, and I think it was really refreshing for you to convey that message, because the amount of hype and it's almost hysteria about how good the M1 is getting a little bit out of control.
I agree with you, and based on the comments and the number of likes on the video, I think a lot of people agreed with what we were saying, but not everybody agreed.
Really?
No, there were some complaints about the video. First, some people saying, well, there are lots of professional users who can use the M1 Max. There are other reasons to buy a computer, and what you're talking about, the M1 is a great machine. We can make use of it, and it's completely fine. I accept all of that. I do accept that. But I want to explain where I was coming from a little bit and reinforce the argument. And first of all, the question that you have to ask is, what is a pro user? What does a pro user mean to you, Pete?
So fundamentally, a pro user is anyone who gets paid, or a professional. Let's start with a professional, is someone who gets paid to do work, which is probably the majority of us get paid to do some form of work, and a lot of us use computers to do that work. So I think we need to narrow down on what a pro user means, and you could start saying, I think one of the examples we've been given is a journalist. Okay, so a journalist is a professional. They get paid to write content for papers, websites, whatever, and they would perhaps use a MacBook Air with an M1 chip to do that. but they could equally use a Windows laptop. They could even use a Chromebook or their phone or an iPad. So a pro user, broadly speaking, is someone who gets paid. But I suppose what we need to do is define what do we mean by a pro user in terms of, I guess, how Apple see it.
I think there is a slight distinction as well in that lots of people, in fact almost everyone I suspect, uses computers as part of their job, but that doesn't make them a professional computer user.
No.
So I'm being specific here about a professional who relies on their computer equipment and wouldn't be able to do their job without it. It's fundamental to what they do. A car mechanic is a professional, and he'll probably have a computer system with a booking system, with a parts catalogue, with an invoicing system, and it would be difficult to perform his job without the computer. But he's not a professional computer user, he's a professional mechanic. And so this is how we can start to make some differentiation. The journalist is a really good example because they absolutely do rely on their computer. But they're not the type of pros that I was talking about. And as you referred to, who does Apple target their pro machines at? And I think it's quite obvious. They target creative professionals. They always have done. So we're talking about people who produce music, people who are video editors, graphic designers. Those are probably the primary ones that spring to mind. But in our case, we've got web developers. Well, that's
specifically web developers.
Specifically web developers. Yeah. So they're a pro user. They absolutely need their computer to do their job. So we'll come back to that. Some people are saying the M1 has got so much performance, why wouldn't you go and buy it? Well, again, we're focusing from a professional viewpoint. Pete, how would you answer that?
Well, it's not just about performance, is it? When you're a professional, the M1 has staggering performance in some areas, as we've kind of already established and others have established. But it's not just a question of raw performance. It's a question of things like, for example, software support. So if you are a professional, let's start with, say, a music user. I know you use a bit of Logic. If you were using Logic with any kind of plugins, additional instruments, that kind of thing, what could the risks be if you just dived into, not just, remember, a new architecture here with the M1 chip, but a new operating system as well?
Well, I haven't done any thorough testing. I've done some benchmarking in Logic, and I'll save that for when I do the Logic video on the YouTube channel. But yeah, on the surface it is incredibly impressive, and it will be amazing. It will be. But right at the moment, you've got the situation where anybody who's a music production specialist is probably going to be using third-party plugins. They're probably going to have hardware that talks to those plugins. So an example of that, I've got a new audio interface, an Antelope audio interface, but it's more than just an audio interface. It's got a digital signal processor on it. So you can actually offload some of the effects processing back to the device. And that's not an unusual thing to find, when you look into a recording studio or a producer's setup. So they'll have hardware equipment that needs to, run perfectly with the machine, needs to have the driver support. You've got third-party plugins that need the support. And I know before we get too many comments, you can run Logic through Rosetta. You can choose, as you can with any of the universal binaries. So if you find the Apple Silicon optimized version isn't working for you, you can run the Intel version through Rosetta, and that does fix a lot of issues with Logic, but it doesn't fix all of the issues.
No.
So it all depends, doesn't it? If you're a music producer that doesn't use those types of plugins that haven't got support, then you could get the M1 Mac and you'd be completely fine. But what if you do rely on those plugins? Well, then it's not an option.
Or what if you find that you think you're okay, you get it in, you dispense with your previous machine, because you've listened to this amazing performance hysteria that's going on, and then down the road you find something you do rely on. Maybe you don't use it every day, but every week or periodically doesn't work. What do you do then? Suddenly, it's a risk assessment, isn't it? That's what we're talking about here. Do you want to risk something that is your livelihood before all the bugs and the software support have been ironed out?
Well, that's the thing, and professionals typically wait. It's not unusual. In fact, quite a lot of people will say this, that they stay one OS release behind.
Yeah.
And when I say OS release, I'm not talking about minor releases. I'm talking about
major ones.
Yeah. So there are people who are only just now upgrading to Catalina.
Yeah, because Big Sur is now the major release. And to be fair, Big Sur has bugs.
It does, and so do the M1 Max. They have issues, and we're going to shoot a quick video today about one of those issues, which will probably be up on the channel tomorrow. It's youtube.com/constantgeekery if you're not watching us on YouTube at the moment.
So pros typically wait. And again, going back to our professional outlet, our core skill, web development, digital marketing agency, if we were to dispense with every other Mac that our developers use right now and replace them all with M1s, whether they be minis, MacBook Airs, whatever, what risk would that have to the business? I know what I think. What do you think?
I think it would be very difficult to trade. I think it would be a pretty critical error, and
It could tank the business.
Yeah, it could. I mean, it wouldn't, because we'd just go and buy more Intel Macs.
But what an expensive mistake to make. So I guess it just really reinforces that should a professional be buying an M1, the answer is depends what type of professional you are. But it could be a very expensive mistake.
It could be, and let's be clear, we fully understand and accept that lots of pros who are buying these things are not getting rid of their primary machine. They're buying it to experiment with and test. And
as have we.
No issue with that whatsoever. Spend your money however you like. But what we're talking about here is a lot of these comments come from consumers, not from professionals. And I think sometimes consumers don't fully understand the financial impact of running a business. So let's take one of those music producers again and use that as an example. Those guys are, some of them, not all of them, but some of them have gone out and invested vast sums of money in the new Mac Pro, for example. And let's be clear here, the kind of specifications that they're buying vastly outperform the M1. But when you compare the price to the performance, the M1 represents astonishing value for money. And a lot of people wouldn't be able to understand, well, why would you pay proportionally so much more for this computer that's only this much faster? And the simple answer to that is it's a question of economics. And if you're making money with your machine, then you just factor in the expense of the machine. I mean, typically most pros aren't going to go and drop the entire amount of money. They'll lease it or finance it in some way through their business, and it's a tax-efficient process. So you can't look at the prices on the Apple website and assume that that's what's actually being spent. And a professional user is happy to do that because they need the right tool for the job. And the price is only just one of those factors. The performance is one of those factors. The architecture is one of those factors. The software support is one of those factors. The relative newness of the operating system is one of those factors. So there are a whole host of factors that are going to affect whether a professional will jump feet first into the M1 platform or not. And that's what I was trying to get across in the video. Maybe I didn't do a very good job of that. When I'm saying to professionals should wait, I'm factoring in all of those concerns. I'm not just simply looking at benchmark figures that an M1 can produce or some YouTube hyped up video that's been designed just to get some clicks in. This is based on all of those concerns, more than 2 decades of business experience as a professional computer user, most of that time using Macs as well as PCs, and based on what I know and what's reasonable. And I think it's good advice. If you're a professional user, just hang on. If you wait, you get the bugs fixed, the software support will come. This stuff is all coming. We don't need to worry about it. So down the line, the Apple Silicon Macs are going to be a brilliant choice for professionals. They're going to be fantastic. They are game changers.
And I actually said to you earlier, we've both used that term game changer in some of the videos we've been putting out in the last few weeks, as have others. And I question for a minute, have we spoken too soon? Because we know these professional versions of Apple Silicon Macs are coming. Have we spoken too soon? I don't think we have, because fundamentally the concept behind Apple Silicon, the architecture, is a game changer, but we're just seeing the very start of the game.
That's it. And you don't get the score until
the end.
That's it. So if you are going to make this consider all of these factors together, then you're probably not gonna rush out and buy it. And I suspect there aren't actually that many pros who would even consider doing such a thing. But for those who do wait, what's the potential for next year's chip?
M1X, I mean, 4 extra high performance cores, more RAM, more connectivity.
Yeah, so I mean, just let's take each of those things. So 4 more high performance cores. So you're doubling the high performance core count, which means for some tasks, you will pretty much be doubling performance.
Yeah.
More RAM. We'll talk about RAM in a minute. You need RAM. Connectivity. Well, again, there are problems. There are problems with the USB and the Bluetooth and everything else with the M1 Max.
And just these 2 little ports here, which we found frustrating when we were doing some, editing the other day, having to constantly swap stuff out.
Yeah. Of course, I've had a couple of people comment on that and say that, because there's been this video doing the round or an article doing the round saying that, but there's 2 separate Thunderbolt buses with the 2 ports, whereas traditionally that's like this 4-port MacBook Pro that I've got here has also got 2 Thunderbolt buses, so it's 2 ports per bus. So what they're saying is it's got more throughput, and you can, extend it with hubs. Well, the cost of those hubs and the ungainliness of them makes that a non-proposition as far as I'm concerned. Yeah, I'm using a dongle right now, but I don't want to buy a computer knowing that I'm going to have to buy two dongles for it. And I'm not even convinced that you can extend the number of Thunderbolt ports either, because again, lots of people have got the wrong idea on this and they think it's Thunderbolt 4, and it's not. It's USB 4, which is Thunderbolt 3.
Yep. So
it's missing those additional features of Thunderbolt 4, and it clearly has some kind of limitation. The chipset clearly has some kind of limitation because you can only plug in one external display on those 2 Thunderbolt ports that are running on 2 separate buses. On top of that, the USB speed is woeful compared to the Intel counterparts. So there's something not quite right here yet. Maybe it's something that Apple can fix with a firmware update.
Maybe it's deliberate because these aren't pro machines.
Who knows? Could be those things. Let's talk about RAM and swap.
Yeah.
So the whole reason that made me make that video is that there are so many people out there saying the 8GB MacBook Air is perfect for video editing. And let's be clear about this. If you are editing 1080p, then yes, it absolutely is fine. If you're editing consumer type codecs like 8-bit, H.264, it's fine. Yeah, you can do it on there. We're talking about professional video editing, and that means using professional codecs. So raw codecs, 10-bit color, much higher bit rates, just heavier stuff, that's going to take more RAM and take more of the processor. So you are editing on your MacBook Air using, actually as it happens, H.264 8-bit, but for an extended period of time, and what happened?
Well, I got beach balls, I got lag, almost to the point of unusable amounts of lag. And it made the whole editing experience, after about halfway through that total edit, it slowed me down big time. It probably added 50 to 75% on top of what I normally would have done, maybe more. And yeah, it completely changed from buttery smooth to a real pain.
But that's not to say it does it every time.
Well, no, I have tried to recreate it. I spent quite a lot of time last week trying to recreate it, and I did get the swap file up. The only change I made, it should be made, I did upgrade from Big Sur 11.0, which the machine shipped with, to 11.0.1. Not saying that had any specific release note that said we fixed a bug with this, but I couldn't make it happen in the same way anymore. I did get the swap file up to nearly 3 gig, and I got a tiny bit of lag momentarily, which you get on any machine when you're editing video if you're really pushing it hard. But I couldn't get it to do it again, and I can only come to the conclusion that, we talked about it, the set of circumstances the first time round were an extended period of time, I was pushing the machine hard. I'd done some benchmarks beforehand. The chances are the SSD was already hot, the CPU was already hot. I then had to plug it in, which would have made it hot again, and that's when you start getting throttling, not just of the CPU, but as you mentioned in your video, of the SSD as well. So I think under certain circumstances, that probably would happen again. And again, if you're a serious pro user and you've got a deadline to get a video out either to a client or up on YouTube, you don't want those kind of delays. It adds stress and it can cost.
Yeah, and I think we should be clear as well that the playback on the timeline is well optimized, but render times, there are much faster machines out there, and a professional video editor would probably have one of those machines. I think that the big issue here, and I've tested footage, incidentally. I've done, for a viewer of the channel, I tested some Blackmagic 6K. And we're going to do all of this. That's what we're doing today in the office, and tomorrow we're doing our big showdown test of video editing. So we're going to show you what happens with these pro codecs, and we'll see how they do. And that video should be on the channel sort of towards the end of the week. Now, in my brief experience testing with these things, you can put the footage on the timeline and it plays and it's fine on the 16 gigabyte model. Actually, the guy who sent me the 6K footage said it doesn't run too well on his 8 gigabyte model.
Interesting.
But it does play all right on the 16 gigabyte model. 6K Blackmagic RAW. As soon as I put a basic color grade on, it started dropping frames. And then the only way to work with it is to switch DaVinci into half resolution mode, proxy media, basically. And that's a key point. If you're happy to work with proxy media, not everyone is, but some people are perfectly happy working with proxy media, especially if you're working on a 4K piece of footage. You're at half resolution, your proxy is going to be 1080p, so for most people that's going to be adequate. Then yeah, these M1 Macs can do a bit of video editing. But when I was editing or playing around with that video, I had a look at the memory usage, and my 16 gig mini was using 10 gig just for resolve.
Wow.
So if you've got an 8 gigabyte...
Well, you're going to be in Swap City, aren't you? You're going to be swapping out all the time.
Yeah, bear in mind that the GPU's got to take some RAM as well.
Yeah.
And I did a hypothetical sort of just to demonstrate the difference between the RAM. If the GPU was grabbing 4 gig on an 8 gig model, you've got 4 gig left. On a 16 gig, you've got 12 gig left. And I've been, that was just a hypothetical. The graphics card doesn't grab an allocation of memory and hold on to it, as far as I'm aware. It's a dynamically assigned piece of memory. But if your GPU is needing that performance, and the system's using it, 8 gigabyte is 8 gigabytes. Whether you're using a Mac one, an M1 Mac or an Intel machine, 8 gigabytes is 8 gigabytes.
Yeah. Yes, it's quick. And yes, I believe Apple are using some memory compression techniques they're really wringing out the performance of that 8 gigabytes. But as I know you're a big fan of Star Trek, Dave. As Scotty once said, and I'm not going to try James Doohan's Scottish accent here, or even Simon Pegg's for that matter, if you've watched the more recent Star Treks. I'm sure there are some Star Trek fans who are subscribers. But to quote Scotty, you cannae change the laws of physics, despite the fact that Star Trek episodes frequently did change the laws of physics. But in the real world, 8 gig is still 8 gig.
Yeah, that's it. And the computer can do all sorts of clever things. Like you say, it's very fast. It's very fast RAM. But they're using the very fast SSD for swapping. And a lot of people are reporting on this and starting to get concerned, especially in the 8 gigabyte model, which does swap. But even the 16 gig model, I've seen swap files over 2 gigs.
Yeah, well, like I said, I got it up to 3 quite comfortably the other day when I was trying to recreate my challenge. And what's the problem with that? I mean, we use SSDs in our web servers, and those SSDs perform huge read and write operations all the time, and we don't have any concerns about that. They'll probably outlast the servers because they're enterprise-grade SSDs.
Well, certainly, yeah. I mean, our expected lifespan for a web server in one of our data centers, typically once it gets to 3 years old, we're thinking about replacing it. 5 years is probably the outside limit. And yeah, those SSDs I don't have any concerns about them at all.
But why?
because they individually cost as much as that MacBook Air. You know, they are enterprise grade components, whereas what you've got in your MacBook Air is,
Consumer grade.
yeah, for want of a better term. And
we don't actually know exactly what is in these, do we?
no, we don't. And I don't like the idea. I mean, your OS is always going to be writing temporary files, writing and reading caches, and various other things. And macOS has always swapped. So does Windows, so does Linux. It's a standard thing that happens. But it's the quantity of swapping that's going on. Because the SSD is so fast, you tend not to notice it until you get that kind of perfect storm of issues that you experience. But you are going to notice it at some point because the SSD has a limited number of read and write operations. Modern SSDs, like we said, they are way better than they used to be. But still, that limit is there and it will come, presumably, at some point. And lots of people are worried about that.
And as a professional, longevity of your machine is a big factor in for all sorts of reasons. And these are not user serviceable, as Lewis Rossman will remind everyone all the time. They are a pig. So once the SSD dies, what's your choices?
Well, it's a bin job. Well, I expect Apple will give you a new machine. I don't even think they would fix it. So
no, but they'll probably recycle it because their environmental credentials are impeccable.
Let's not get into that. So the long and short of it is that, you know, the professional users that I was talking about are people who rely on their computers and who, you know, in normal circumstances would wait. They would wait for the OS to be stable. They would wait for bugs to be worked out. They would wait for software support. So I'm not saying anything earth-shattering here. We do try to do the best we can, and it's very difficult making video content. And you know, the idea of this, you know, the people that have sort of come back on the last video saying, you know, well, this is an example of a professional user and he can use an M1 Mac, and it's like, yeah, okay. What do we do? Do we put up a video that's 3 hours long where we list out every possible professional application for? No, we have to make generalizations and we have to accept that there will always be exceptions to the rule.
And to be fair, we can only really comment in our spheres of experience. You know, you've got music production experience. We've both got video editing production experience. We've both got web development and design experience. So those are the areas we can comment on. Yeah, we can look at other things to a degree, but if we go outside of our area of expertise, then that's not really what Constant Geekery is about.
No, I don't think so. And the thing I've always tried to do as well, and I've tried to do it in my professional career, is to make the complex accessible. You know, it's no good for me to sit here, you know, talking in deeply technical terms. That's not going to benefit the vast majority of viewers. So I try to keep everything accessible to as many people as possible and try to explain concepts in real-world terms that makes it easy to understand. But that means that you've got to simplify things, you've got to generalize, you've got to do these things. So that doesn't change the point that's underlying, which is, in the last video, professional users are better off waiting rather than going through the pain barrier of being early adopters. And I don't really think anyone can argue with that wisdom. And secondly, 16 gigabytes is definitely better than 8.
Oh, always.
And M1 doesn't change that. So if you're buying an M1 Mac, if all you're doing, and say this again, if all you're doing is basic general purpose computing, you're using Office, you're consuming content, all the rest of it, 8 gigs is fine. But if you can afford to put 16 in, put 16 in it. These computers last for a long time. You're going to have it for years on end. How do you know where you're going to be in 3 years' time? If you're someone who keeps your computer for a long time, and even if you're not, even if you're someone who likes to upgrade frequently, better spec computers are easier to sell and fetch a better price. So whichever way you look at it, you're better off with 16 gigabytes.
Absolutely.
Anyway, I think we've done that to death. Let's talk about that note. Let's talk about, just briefly, price scalping, Pete.
How do you feel about price scalping?
It almost makes me want to vomit, actually.
Does it?
Yeah.
So what's made you feel vomit worthy this week?
I don't like it when people take advantage of other people.
A bit of gouging of price.
Yeah, or as they, you know, it's profiteering. I'm pretty sure in this country during the Second World War, profiteering was a was a pretty serious offence,
Yep.
and you could expect to be punished. And yet, with the recent pandemic, the price of hand gel,
Toilet roll.
toilet roll, all these other things, people were profiteering. And the price of webcams as well shot through the roof.
Yeah.
Now, there are those out there who will say, well, that's just the nature of supply and demand, and that's capitalism and all the rest of it. Yeah, that may be true, but it's also greed and it's profiteering. And the same thing is happening with price scalping.
What's happening?
So, new tech gets released. Let's go back to
NVIDIA cards.
NVIDIA graphics cards.
AMD, same.
Yeah, same with AMD. The new PlayStation, probably the Xbox as well. I haven't checked that. These new tech items come out, and people are forming buying groups, and they're using bots, or they're individually using bots to go and hammer these sites. And I've seen these things running, and they are literally every few seconds they're looking at the site for stock. And the moment the stock comes in, there's a script that will go off and make the purchase. Now, as a web developer, I know that it would actually be quite easy to stop that from happening. And so I don't really understand why it's not being stopped. But these people get these cards. Now, if you're doing that just to get yourself a card because you're desperate to have one, because you really want to enjoy the product, well
Fair
done.
play. Yeah.
Absolutely. However, that's not what people are doing. They're taking the cards and then they're going onto eBay and selling them for vastly inflated prices, or trying to sell them for vastly inflated prices. If they make the mistake of setting it up as an auction, then you can guarantee that the auction will be hijacked.
Yep.
Lots of upset gamers out there, that's for sure.
Understandably.
Yeah. eBay doesn't seem to want to do anything about it.
eBay is definitely a subject for another day in general, but quelle surprise.
And I think it's a bit of a plague, really, because it's drifting into other areas. Now, you know that I did a very unpopular little review of the Nintendo Game & Watch.
I thoroughly enjoyed it. It was a nice bit of nostalgia. If you haven't seen that on the channel, youtube.com Constant Geekery, it's well worth a watch. It brought me back to my, young adulthood.
I've been enjoying playing with it. I saw the thing advertised, and I saw that Amazon were taking pre-orders, so I pre-ordered it, and I didn't think twice about it. When I was looking around, because obviously it got the nostalgia going, and I was thinking, actually, quite like some old retro Game & Watch. So trying to look on eBay for Game & Watch, and it's just every page of Game & Watch is festooned with these new anniversary edition, special edition Game & Watch. And they're being sold for vastly more than the retail price. And people are claiming that they are really rare and difficult to get hold of. And at the time when I checked, you could still buy them direct from Nintendo for £45. And Amazon still have plenty of stock as well at £50. So other people who don't have the wherewithal perhaps to shell out on an RTX 3090 are thinking they can apply this scalping principle to even cheap tech, a bit of cheap collectible tech. And it's really bizarre. It's a cool little device, and everyone should, you should enjoy it. They should be bought to be enjoyed, not for some greedy person to make a quick buck on.
No, absolutely. That's it's just not right.
But here's where it gets really terrible, Pete.
It gets worse.
It gets worse. So I've been thinking about building a heavyweight PC for doing DaVinci work.
Yeah, you keep rattling on about that.
This is a classic example. The M1 doesn't offer enough for me to replace my existing Mac Pro, because for a lot of the work I do, my 2013 Mac Pro is faster than the M1 Mac. There we go, we've said that. So it's not a replacement for me. I can wait even longer. And as you know, I've been waiting a while anyway. I was going to buy a 2019 Mac Pro back in June.
We know. Everyone knows.
So I've been thinking about, I'm just going to build an AMD PC and I'm going to enjoy it. I can't get the pieces, of course, because they're all being scoped.
Get stick a Ryzen in it, are you?
I'm thinking a 5950X.
Be rude not to. So what do they retail for in the UK?
750 of our English pounds.
Wow, that's a lot, isn't it, for a chip?
It is.
You could buy a M1 Mac Mini for that. But they are astonishing chips. So presumably you've got one pre-ordered somewhere.
No, because you can't get hold of them. I mean, of course, I could go on eBay and spend $1,000, but I don't want to pay the markup. So,
Well, why don't you do a pre-order from a sort of reputable retailer?
someone like, say, Overclockers.
Overclockers, I mean, yeah, they've been around for a long time. Bastions of selling good tech, good retailers, good reviews.
Yeah,
Why
I've
not?
bought stuff from them before. Well, I'll tell you why not, Pete, because they're also into the scalping game. And yes, we are naming and shaming you, Overclockers, because you're pricing that chip at £860.
£110 more than the RRP.
Yeah. I'd like to know the rationale for that. I really would. And they're not the only ones. You know, there are plenty of others out there. You don't have to look far to find an example. I
Ah.
so yeah, I just think it's a very bizarre practice. It's going to infect tech launches.
Hmm.
And,
It's going to be the new thing, isn't it?
yeah, and it's not a good thing. And you know, you're denying consumers the chance to actually use the stuff. There's going to be a lot of people who, for example, with the PlayStation and the Xbox, say they'll maybe want to be buying those as Christmas presents, for example. Not going to be able to.
No, not unless they shell out unreasonable amounts of money.
And unfortunately, you can see scenarios where people will feel like they're forced to do that and they've got no alternative, so they'll pay. But the best thing you can do, folks, is do not buy from the scalpers.
No.
You know, it just means we've got to wait longer, but supply will come out, and then these guys will be left holding all this stock, which they won't be able to sell for anything more than retail, which means they lose money.
They lose money. Starve them of the feed.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you'd think ultimately there's going to have to become some legislation around this. You know, it's happened in other industries, hasn't it? You think of tickets, event tickets, that kind of thing. That used to be a very common thing to scalp those.
I'm pretty sure that's. I don't know what the situation is in this country. It's certainly illegal in some countries in the world.
Yeah.
To sell an event ticket for higher than face price.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it is illegal, or certain aspects of it are, because I think if you're selling tickets outside a venue for more than they're worth, I think you can be arrested for that. I might be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure it's not looked on well by the law in the UK.
Yeah. Now, we don't want to get political or anything like that. I think it would take quite something for legislation to come into play, but there are simple things that website owners can do, retailers can do, by taking proper pre-orders that are human validated. eBay, frankly, have a responsibility to step up to the plate. They obviously won't because it's eBay.
No.
And I think the only thing that they are acting upon is people who are trying to sell them when they don't actually have them.
Yeah.
But that doesn't stop the scalpers who've got one, they've managed to get one, and they're trying to sell it for a higher price. Well, I think eBay needs to take action against that. The sooner that it's stamped out, the better for everyone, because ultimately consumers lose. And it makes you wonder whether it's happened with the M1 Max as well.
Yeah, that's something worth looking at. I don't know if anyone else, any of our listeners have had any experience or observations on that, but could well be.
Yeah. So, yeah, have we been a little bit ranty today?
A little bit ranty, but sometimes we are. I mean, it's not as bad as the aborted eBay podcast that we put together a few weeks ago.
But we couldn't get through it because I just got too agitated.
We're not big fans of eBay. Maybe that that's something we can try and re-record at some point in a slightly more controlled way.
I think I guess what I'd like to say is that when you're doing creative work and producing for YouTube, if you're not creatively doing podcasts or YouTubes, but you like watching these things, perhaps this is a helpful insight, or maybe not. I don't know. But when you're doing anything creative, you put a bit of yourself into it. There's an emotional investment, and it's you genuinely. We try to do the best for the listeners and the viewers. Want the channel to be genuinely useful, want it to have genuine good advice. Yes, we are monetized and get a pittance from Google, which doesn't cover our time in producing the videos. Let's just make that clear. At the moment, maybe it will one day. The motivation isn't financial for doing this. The motivation is to have a creative outlet. And I covered this before on the channel when I did a subscriber thank you video. This has been quite important for me because as our business has become more successful, I've not been involved with the creative work that I used to do.
Yeah.
And I found
Oh, it's natural. As your business grows, you take a step back. I mean, that's part of the journey of a business owner. In most cases, is you take a step back so others can continue the good work that you've hopefully started.
But it did make me miserable for a bit of time, as you will attest, Pete.
Yeah. So I'm really pleased for every single subscriber out there, because it has made them happier. So thank you. You've made my life much more bearable.
Yeah, and look, if you've got an opinion to share on the channel, please share it. All I ask is that we do it in a polite and respectful way, and we behave like adults. We won't always agree on everything. That's fine, but and I genuinely, if we've got something wrong, the feedback really helps, because it helps us to gain a bigger perspective, and it means that future content can be more adapted to that bigger perspective.
Yeah, we don't have all the knowledge by any means. We're far from it, but we've got our 2 pennies worth, and if others can add to that, then we'll certainly fold that into the recipe of constant geekery cake.
Yeah, absolutely. So what have we got this week? We're going to do a quick USB test to show the flaw in the M1 USB. So that will probably be up tomorrow. We're doing this video showdown. That's going to be quite an exhaustive exercise, so we probably should stop the podcast and go and get on with doing it, which we'll be testing today and filming tomorrow, and hopefully that will be up towards the end of the week. And then, of course, next week, I assume we'll have another podcast. That may well be our last podcast of the year, though, because we need a break. And doing a regular weekly podcast is quite a challenge. So also for other reasons, I need a couple of weeks off. So we'll take a break after next week's podcast, and we'll be back in the new year again. Anyway, I don't know what we'll be talking about next week. Hopefully something interesting and tech related, Pete.
That's normally the formula we go with.
Probably with some really bad analogies.
And some rants.
And possibly some terrible accents as well from you.
And no doubt a dad joke or two.
Well, there we go. I haven't had any whiskey during the podcast, but I feel like I need some now. But
that's the effect of working with me.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much, everybody, for listening. We do appreciate it very much. Please check out the YouTube channel, youtube.com/constantgeekery. Thank you for all our new subscribers. Thank you for all of our old subscribers. You know who you are. We love talking to you guys. Thanks so much for supporting the channel. And we'll see you next time on the can't get my words out.
Constant Geekery.
Well, let me try that again. Constant Geekery podcast. We'll see you next time.
Cheerio.
Should we just do another outro?
No, I think that was great.
Okay.